Hello, everybody. My name is Gregory Rubeck, and for the Big Data Analytics final project, I focused on crime trends in Chicago. So that's what we're going to be talking about. For anybody who doesn't know, that's a flag of Chicago. Um, so just some personal background on myself. One of the reasons I chose this as a project topic is I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, went into the city semi-regularly, and growing up watching Chicago news and really news around the country, there's kind of one word that gets thrown out with Chicago a lot, and that's murder. You can see just the sampling of some recent headlines here. With Chicago, it's all murder, murder, murder. Chicago accounted for 22% of a nationwide increase in murders last year, and most dangerous city, Chicago tops 400 homicides, leading the nations. I think most people in the United States are aware that Chicago has a reputation as being a pretty dangerous city. 2016 was one of the deadliest years on record for Chicago homicides, and in 2016 and 2017, Chicago had more murders than New York and LA combined. And for those who may not know, New York is the biggest city in the country. LA is the second biggest, and Chicago is the third. So it is kind of staggering that Chicago would have more murders than those two cities combined. So that does kind of make you wonder, what about other crimes? So really the focus of this project that I'm looking at, since you don't hear a lot about other crimes, is just overall, is crime getting worse in Chicago? So in order to answer that problem, I looked for data available online, and Chicago actually offers a lot of free public data on a variety of topics, and that's all through the Chicago Data Portal. This is just kind of a screenshot here of the different data topics they have: buildings, community, education, environment, parks and rec. So the crime data actually comes through the public safety data portal that they have there. They have a lot of different options related to public safety data. And then actually within the Chicago Data Portal itself, online, there are several different options for data visualizations. You can do a lot of different charts and maps online with the data. They have lots of different filtering options. And they also offer a lot of different exporting options. So it's very user-friendly with their website. So the data set that I pulled and used was crime data from 2001 to the present, and I was actually able to download that as a CSV file directly from that website. So here you can see is just a sampling of that CSV file opened up in Excel. The complete file was too big for Excel to fully open, but it was convenient for opening it here just to see what data was actually available in that data set. You can see there's a variety of different datas here, and I just kind of highlighted focusing on the different data types because those were important when making the data table. You can see primary type of crime has string data, arrest data is Boolean. Third highlight there, data, the ward is integer data, and then latitude you can see is a floating variable. So just a variety of data types to be aware of when going through this project. So big data justification. What makes this a big data problem? Well, this project was a big data problem mainly due to the volume of data. Everyone should remember this chart from class with discussing the 3 V's of big data. So the complete data file that I had downloaded ultimately found it to have 6.6 million rows of data. The file was approximately 1.5 gigabytes. So in the kind of grand scheme of things, still relatively small, since we're not in the terabyte range, but still much too big for Excel to easily handle and manipulate the data. With regard to the other 2 V's, the velocity of the data is relatively slow, as there's relatively few data points collected daily, only probably tens of thousands, and then the variety of the data is also limited just due to the very structured nature of crime reporting. So obviously the first step once we had our CSV file was to get it uploaded into the Hadoop environment. And that was done by creating this data table in Hive. So here's just kind of a screenshot sampling. Looks very similar to the previous screenshot. This is just showing it in Hive. So on to the actual data analysis. So really, after having looked at the available data and thinking about the analysis that could be done on it, there were several questions that I set out to answer. Wanting to understand what are the most common crimes, kind of related to that, which crimes are domestic and which crimes lead to arrests, where are the most common locations of crimes, when are the most common occurrences of crimes, and then what trends are shown in the data. And all of these, again, are trying to answer that ultimate question of, is crime getting worse in Chicago? So to answer those questions, all the queries that I ran were ran in Impala, and that was chosen for the faster querying speed over Hive. So to start with, the most common crimes, here you can see the simple query results, and the top 3 crimes are theft, battery, and criminal damage. You can see the other list of rounding out the top 10. For this project, we'll be focusing on the top 4 crimes in later slides. Another way to kind of visualize that data is with Tableau. You can break it down into a bar chart. Here, similar results as what's shown on the previous screen, but then kind of overlaid on top of this is also the arrest data. And here it's interesting, you can see that narcotics almost always entails arrests, and that's followed by battery and then theft, though battery and theft are much lower compared to the total percentages. Kind of similarly, here you can see domestic crimes overlaid on top of the complete data set. Here battery is the most common domestic crime at about half, followed by other offenses and assaults. I thought it was kind of interesting that theft and criminal damage were the next 2 most common for domestic crimes, as that's not really an intuitive result that theft and criminal damage would be domestic. Next, looking at crime locations, uploading the latitude and longitude coordinates into Tableau. Tableau is pretty smart where it can actually pull up a map. So for anyone who's not familiar with the map of Chicago, this is pretty much it. It's interesting just to see all the data points represented here. Unfortunately, because of the high number of crimes, you can't really make a lot of useful conclusions from this chart just with the high number of data points. But it's just shown here to kind of highlight where crimes are occurring within the city. Another way that we can look at crime locations, though, is the city wards. Chicago is split up into 50 wards, and you can run a query of those wards to see which wards contain the most crimes. So after running the query, you can see that Ward 28 has the most, followed by Ward 42 and Ward 24. And those are kind of highlighted here on the ward map. For those who may not be familiar with the kind of layout of Chicago, I also added in here the 2 airplanes showing the 2 airports. The one at the top there, Ward 41, that's Chicago O'Hare. The one kind of in the middle, lower left side, that's Chicago Midway. And then I also have the famous Chicago Bean showing Millennium Park and kind of downtown area. So you can see where kind of the most problematic wards are, kind of just north of a lot of the more touristy destinations. Another breakdown for locations is just the location description in the data set. The simple bar chart here shows that streets are the most common locations of crime, followed then by residences and apartments. This one was also a little surprising. I was expecting sidewalks to be higher up on this data set, but it's actually the fourth most common. And then lastly, for locations, there's actually a block field where you can filter by individual addresses. They are somewhat censored in the specific numbers just for privacy reasons, but even running a query on them, the top result is well known enough that you can find it on Google, and it's actually Chicago O'Hare Airport, which is interesting, but also at the same time not too surprising given the number of people that pass through there on a daily basis. This next chart here shows the hourly breakdown for the top 4 crimes, again, of battery, criminal damage, narcotics, and theft. Here you can kind of see that all 4 crimes have a minimum in the early morning hours. Theft is the first crime to really kind of ramp up throughout the morning and has a spike around lunchtime. Narcotics has kind of 2 spikes around lunch and the later evening hours, and criminal damage and battery just kind of increase throughout the day. So then looking at the overall trend of the crime categories for all the years, you can kind of see here the general trend that most of the crime categories are decreasing from 2001 to 2017. The data set also included 2018 data, but I didn't include it in this slide and some of the following slides just since the year is still in progress. So it shows a sharp drop off that isn't really representative since the year is still in progress. But here you can see just kind of the overall trend that most crime categories do seem to be decreasing. This next slide here shows it in a bit better detail, again focusing on those top 4 crime categories here, and it's a bit easier to see that overall crimes have been decreasing, although 2016 and 2017 things have tended to level off a bit more. So since theft was the top crime category for all the years, you can drill down into that to look at the breakdown of thefts, and that's what this plot is showing for all the years. And here you can see that for all the years in the data set, the most common thefts were thefts of $500 and under, followed by thefts of over $500, and then followed by thefts from buildings. Here you can still see the general trend that overall things have decreased from 2001 to about 2015, and then there's actually been a slight rebound in 2016 and 2017. Another way to look at when crimes are occurring is looking at it on a monthly breakdown between the various years. So here is just January through December, and then for all the different years, you can see that crimes are at a minimum during the winter months, specifically during the month of February, and then are at a peak during the summer months, specifically during the month of July. And you can kind of see, if you see the colors, with the blues at the tops being 2001 and then the pinks and purples down at the bottom being the more recent years, that over time, in general, crimes have decreased. But again, those last several lines are a bit more overlapping. This chart again showing the hourly breakdown, but over all the years in the data set, fairly similar to the hourly breakdown for the first 4 crime categories. Here again you can see a peak at midnight and then a sharp drop off into the early morning hours. It ramps up through the morning, again a spike at lunchtime, and then a gradual build into the later evening hours. But again, the same general trend of decreasing over the years, with the most recent years more overlapping. So just to compare against that, I also ran a query on the number of arrests per year. here you can see that arrests have pretty much followed the same general trends that the overall crimes trends followed, just showing in more recent years crimes or arrests have decreased kind of proportionally with crimes, and again leveling off in the more recent years. I thought that was interesting because it shows that arrests aren't really serving as a deterrent for crimes, and they aren't arresting more people in order to try and reduce crimes. So I just thought that was interesting. So let's kind of review the conclusions that we drew from this. So again, what are the most common crimes? We saw that theft, battery, and criminal damage were the most common. Of those crimes, battery, assault, and criminal damage are the most likely to be domestic, while narcotics, battery, and theft were the most likely to lead to arrests. The most common locations for crimes are streets, Ward 28, and O'Hare Airport. And then the most common occurrences of crime are in the summer months, around lunchtime, and then again leading into the late evening. And then as far as trends in the data, pretty much all the ways I was able to break it down, you could see the general trend that throughout the years, crime has been overall decreasing, but the most recent years have leveled off. So back to the overall question, is crime increasing in Chicago? I think this project conclusion is that overall crime has actually been decreasing in Chicago. Again, that comes with the caveat that recent years have somewhat leveled off, but it does speak to the need to maintain focus to ensure that 2018 does not see a trend reversal and start to creep back up. So why are crime rates improving? There has been some information published out there kind of looking into this, and kind of the top reasons that Chicago officials have attributed to the improving crime rates are the hiring of more officers, stronger community policing efforts, investments in technology, specifically around gunshot detection and predictive crime software. So some additional recommendations that could be drawn specifically from this data set and the analysis that was performed. Additional patrols in wards 28, 42, and 24 would be the most impactful, as well as increasing patrols starting around lunchtime and leading into the evening hours. And then lastly, residents, visitors, and police should all be extra vigilant for theft, since that is continually the most common crime. Some opportunities for future analysis. There is opportunity for data cleaning with this data set, or really any big data set. I did encounter some difficulty with sorting through null values and other errors, and that's likely true of all big data sets. This is where data wrangling software such as the Trifacta Wrangler Edge that was talked about in class would be beneficial for sorting and cleaning the data set. There's also possibly some opportunities for regression analysis, which could be used to check for predictive correlations for crimes or criminals. The current data set is pretty heavy on response variables and pretty light on predictor variables, so I wasn't able to do any regression analysis with the current data set. Chicago could also make more data publicly available. That would enable additional data analysis such as regression, or possibly even associate rule mining on repeat offenders, just looking at what crimes are most likely to be committed if they've already committed a crime. As we've talked about, data generation and collection is increasing exponentially, so releasing more data to the public just allows for more and better data research. And lastly, other cities should adopt Chicago's data collection and sharing practices, because again, Chicago's website is very user-friendly. There's a lot of data out there. I definitely encourage anyone who's interested in it to take a look at that website. But if other cities adopted similar practices, it would just, again, have the opportunity for better data sharing and learning of best practices between cities. Final slide here is just references that were talked about in the presentation. So again, I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation, and that's all.